So I wanted to give a little bit of a preview for tonight's game for the Indiana Fever as they go to Los Angeles to play the LA Sparks. Now, the LA Sparks have beaten us both times they played us this year. They're a team with a record that's not very good, but every time they play us, they play lights out. As a team, you see things that I'm guessing doesn't happen in other games, or they'd probably be winning. They beat us, in times when we really weren't doing as good as we are now as far as being able to find ways to win. I know I've called them out for, lack of, pride and effort and trying against, all the other teams that, the other 11 teams in the league, not counting them, that, the fans don't pay as much attention to as opposed to the Fever. And, of course, they have the very, very unlikable Kelsey Plum, but she is a hell of a ball player, at least by the women's standards. So, you gotta give her props on that, but you just have to wonder why can they beat the Fever but have so much trouble against everybody else. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't think Caitlin's gonna play in this game. That's my understanding, at least. I know she showed up to the Seattle game wearing like warm-up shorts or practice shorts, and I don't know if I don't think she planned on playing, but I think she wanted to do like all the pregame warm-ups and stuff and just kind of get her feet wet on that and kind of get back in, kind of ease her way back in the groove, and maybe she'll do that again tonight. But, the Indiana Fever, they're on a 5-game winning streak, and of course now it's shifted into overdrive, this narrative of, are the Indiana Fever better off without Caitlin Clark? And like I said, I have a ton of respect for this team. They do an amazing job. The players, they have found ways to win, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, what's going on with the Indiana Fever right now during this winning streak is not a sustainable model for success. First of all, the substitutions, the fact that, certain players are just not getting enough time. Kelsey Mitchell, when she's having a really good night, she has some baffling, pretty lengthy periods of time where she's not playing, and, coming right off of a heater on the court. Lexi Hull, she played very few minutes last game, and what they've done to Chloe Bibby has been just criminal, I'm going to say. They, brought her in. She had 2 amazing games, and then the third game after they signed her to a season contract, not just the 7-day or 10-day or whatever it was contract. She went in there, made 2 quick threes, and I guess Stephanie White saw something she didn't like on defense and benched her the rest of the game. That's not cool. She's somebody we need to be giving reps to in this moment, because she is an ideal player to be playing with Caitlin Clark. And that brings me to the main point. Are the Indiana Fever better without Caitlin Clark? No. Now, like I've always said, I think there is a bit of a blessing in disguise with her injury, because she's getting to watch these ladies play without her, and she's getting to see what they do when she's not on the court, what things they can do, their strengths and their weaknesses. And I know she's on the bench watching this and paying attention, and I really think she's going to incorporate this into her game. So, you hate to see her get hurt, and, they're never, ever better without her. But I do think, her absence is going to, help her, and it's going to help her, step back and kind of take a look at things. And I really think it's going to help the team, if they can get her back within a decent amount of time before the playoffs, to possibly make a deep playoff run, maybe make the, conference finals or the semifinals, whatever the situation there is, maybe win 1 or 2 rounds of the playoffs. But like I said, to me, what they're doing right now is not a sustainable model. Natasha Howard, like I said, I have so much respect for her. She's had some amazing games. This last game against Seattle was a great game. They played her 32 minutes or 33 minutes, 31 minutes, something like that. That's not, like I said, a very sustainable model. To me, they really need to be kind of platooning that out a little bit, to Michaela Timpson and Chloe Bibby. Because at the end of the day, they need to give those 2 some reps. And I just don't think, a steady diet of 32 minutes for Natasha Howard on this team is going to be a good recipe for success. Like I said, when things are on, things are good. When they're not, she gets pulled kind of quick too. Which, again, I think Stephanie White has too much of a quick trigger when it comes to stuff like that. But as far as this, are they better without Caitlin Clark? Caitlin Clark is a generational transcendent talent. You You have to build a team around her. You know, we've seen this before. People are like, well, this person gets hurt and the team does good. Well, at the end of the day, if you want true success, you have to build a team around that transcendent star. I mean, look at the Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan. Their first 6 years, you know, they couldn't get it done. They couldn't win the big one. Now, of course, you know, they were coming as a team and a franchise. They were coming from the absolute depths and having to work their way up. You know, they got swept the first three, or won one game in the first three playoff series in the first round, including getting swept by those crazy good Celtics teams with like a million Hall of Famers on them or something. But they put Michael out there. They, you know, put him through the fire. They let him kind of develop. He went through his phase where he just scored as many points as possible, averaging 37 a season. His third season, his second, you know, really full season. And they just had to build a team around him, you know. And if you look at the team they built around Michael, it doesn't make a ton of sense. You know, you wouldn't think that on any planet, you know, that a team in the early 90s with Horace Grant and Bill Cartwright and Stacey King and John Paxson, you know, even with Scottie Pippen on there, you would not think that is a three-time consecutive champion, the three-peat team. But with Michael there, it was because those are the perfect players for him. And that second three-peat, you would definitely not see them as a champion or even a, you know, especially a three-peat champion. You know, you got Dennis Rodman, you know, kind of a, you know, on the tail end, you know, his mental state was deteriorating, but he could still do the job on the rebounds. And, you know, he physically wasn't quite what he once was, but, you know, he's still doing good. But you also had, you know, Steve Kerr, who was, you know, good to come in, shoot some threes, and, you know, get a few points in bunches, and you can't really rely on him for much outside of that. They had Tony Kukoc, amazing shooter, and that's about it. He deserves a lot of credit. I actually have a lot of respect for Tony. You know, their center combination was Luke Longley and Bill Winnington. Again, two guys that, you know, played their hearts out, but people that, you know, really in any other franchise or system would not have done so well. And of course, you know, Ron Harper, who, you know, is very, very underrated. His ability on defense, you know, his basically, you know, Gary Payton light, you know, kind of okay on offense, really good defense, you know. And again, even with Scottie Pippen, you know, you wouldn't see that as a championship team. Because, you know, people talk about the 1994 Bulls after Michael Jordan retired and went to play baseball and didn't play any games for him that year. You know, Scottie, Horace Grant, and Bill Cartwright, if I'm not mistaken, they all made the All-Star game. You know, it was very much a balanced effort across the board. And people were, you know, they only won 2 less games that year than they had the previous year. And, you know, those guys are coming off 3 consecutive finals runs. And people were, you know, and of course, you know, the people that want to make LeBron the GOAT are saying, well, look what those teams did after Michael left. Whereas, you know, when LeBron left, all his teams went to shit. But, you know, but again, that was not a sustainable model. You had to have Michael Jordan. You had to have that transcendent player there, and you had to have players around him that just complemented him. And that's where I have to give Jerry Krause credit, which I know he's been kind of a polarizing figure, but he did a great job. And even now they're willing to admit he did a great job. Apparently he rubbed people the wrong way. I'm sure if I was there and had any talent and was able to play on the team, I'd have probably been rubbed the wrong way too, just judging from what I'm hearing. But, you know, purely anecdotal, but, you know, at the end of the day, you have to give him credit. And that's where I see the Caitlin Clark situation. You have to put the players around her that are going to do well. That's why when I saw Chloe Bibby, I immediately said that is a Caitlin Clark teammate. You know, she's a bigger player, but she spreads the floor. She shoots threes. You know, she's able to, you know, make some noise on defense from the small sample size we've seen. To me, that she's somebody that, you know, we need to have on a Caitlin Clark team. Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston, they have that, you know, Stockton Malone type thing going. I think Rhodes Rants from Black and White Sports put it best. You know, that pick and roll, you know, old school Stockton to Malone. That's where you're going to see those two really, really, you know, make some noise. You know, Kelsey Mitchell, you know, she's, like I said, I love her game. I do think, she's going to have to make a few adjustments, which I know people will look at that and say, well, she shouldn't have to adapt. Well, maybe not, but I just feel like if she were to, maybe pass a little bit more, maybe once she gets the ball, maybe not immediately, or just completely have it in her mind she's going to get a shot off, either a three-pointer or take it to the rack. She needs to do that a lot, but maybe not as often. And that's the thing, you have to put that team around Caitlin. I know a lot of people have been calling out Caitlin, saying, well, how come these players are doing better without her? Well, how come Bill Cartwright and Horace Grant did better in '94 without Michael Jordan? It's just how it goes. There have to be roles. You can't have, very rarely does the whole, everybody has, the same amount of importance on the team. Very rarely does that actually work. Even you look at a team like the 1970 New York Knicks, who probably, embodied that as much as anybody. At the end of the day, it still came down to, Willis Reed and Walt Clyde Frazier and Bill Bradley and Dave DeBusschere and, a lot of those people. Some of the Spurs teams as well, but you still had, Duncan, Ginobili, and Parker kind of leading the way. So that's just the template for success in basketball. We've seen it for years and years and years, long before I was born, and long after I'll be gone, whenever that might be. So, you have to look at that and say, as much as I love Ari McDonald, unless she's willing to, actually pass the ball to Caitlin when they're on the floor, maybe put her strictly a backup point guard role. I wish we'd not got rid of Erica Wheeler. I'll say that again for the 500 millionth time, and I don't care how many times I have to say it, that we should not have got rid of her. But we just have to, we have to, be realistic when it comes to this. Are we better without Caitlin? Like I said, at the end of the day, she's been hurt, and I think we're going to see a lot of good things come. But a lot of these players are going to have to, accept a lesser role, at least on paper and on the stat sheet, and understand that, their true value is going to lie outside the stat sheet. Again, Dennis Rodman. Yeah, he had insane rebounding numbers, but that was about it. But everybody recognized he was one of the best defenders out there still. Many years removed from his Defensive Player of the Year awards, and I believe it was 90, 91, or 89 and 90. He was still a monster on defense, and it didn't show up on the stat sheet, but everybody knew. So that's kind of my preview for the game and my thoughts for the Fever going forward. We have to understand that Caitlin Clark is the transcendent generational talent, and obviously when it comes to box office and money, you're not getting any better than her. So hopefully we recognize that, and hopefully we build a team around her, and that's where, quite honestly, I'm worried when it comes to Stephanie White and Kelly Krosnoff and Amber Cox, the people in the front office, because they're very much in that old school WNBA mode that it just doesn't work for Caitlin Clark. It didn't work last year with Christy Sides at first. Christy Sides finally said, okay, screw it, we're going to run. And, the second half of the year was amazing. And the fact that Stephanie White still has not gotten there, because she's very much revered as a head coach within the old guard of the WNBA, I don't know. So hopefully we can beat Los Angeles tonight. Hopefully we can, go out there and attack them and do what all these other teams other than us have been able to do to them. But I think Chicago beat them. Shit. So we'll see. So we'll see tonight, and I'll make a video afterwards. Thank you guys for watching these videos, and I'll talk to you later.